Hello, everyone. We're always talking about globalization as a widespread phenomena that is increasing in number and in the varieties of different fields. And we see indeed, especially with the digitalization process, that we have tremendous number of the global flows, both economical and social flows and political flows that are being created that link our community and making us as a global village. But on each of such flow, we have some centers. And usually these centers are connected with the cities. And before we talk about the globalization, and we should definitely stress that cities and city communities probably were the first players, the first advocates for globalization that played a tremendous role as a both push and pull factor uh, to put all the people wisdom, especially labor force and technologies and finances and money and political administration into the one point that was possible to ensure the development of the region, development of the city, and the development of the community. And in future, we are definitely talking about the processes of the decentralization that is happening in every country. So that means that these local communities are becoming more and more powerful in actually making their policies and connecting themselves with other points. So here we come to the very important issue of the urbanization as a part of the globalization. But we will definitely talk not only about the human beings that increased the number of the population of the city, but actually the politics of urbanization and the politics of the city that nowadays is starting to be as a separate player within the global community of states, NGO actors, and also the business entities. So let us jump in today and talk a little bit about urbanization and the global cities. And today I just want to raise a few questions about what is urbanization, what is the impact of urbanization on politics, on society, on economy, on culture, what are the main urbanization trends that are happening today in the world, in this unique approach, or do we see the differences in different regions? And definitely we'll talk a little bit about the global cities, the powerful centers that are running our global community. So first, we should stress that urbanization is a very natural process of the development of our society. We are thinking that we are living in the nation state, but actually the first were the cities. And if we come to the idea of the state as the unity that organized society, we should state that this phenomena we have for near 500 years, but many thousand years before we have cities, and they were the main points and still are. So here in the chat, you can see that nowadays, at least for 2017 and 18, the majority of the countries are highly urbanized. That means that the number of the population that is living in the cities is much larger, much bigger than the number of population that are living in the small villages. The more developed country is, I mean, with the economic income or wealth income, the more urbanized is its society. However, there is no concrete tendency. There is a correlation, but there is no dependency on that. Nevertheless, we still see that the more developed country is, the more urbanized it is. Nevertheless, here, please, you can see that still there is a number of the communities like in Central and East Africa and also South East Asia that it still has let's say even more village population than the urban population. However, definitely these trends are changing and I will prove it. And thinking right now about living in the world, I would rather say that we are not living in the countries and we are not living in the global societies, but we are living actually in the cities. And please, you can see that in 2008, that was a focal point when our community, our world society started to live in the cities more than in the rural areas. And this is a trend that is only growing and growing. So still 2008, we are not living in the countries anymore. We are exactly living in the cities in the figural meaning. And we can see that this urbanization trends is actually the worldwide trend. So this is not special about our age. And definitely in the Middle Ages later, on the modern period, we have the increase in number of the cities that is really connected with the industry. So the industrialization process caused the possibility of building new manufacturers, new social possibilities. I mean, the social infrastructure like the hospitals or schools or universities or whatever located in one area, because it was much more cheaper. It was much more cheaper to have labor present in one area and also all the facilities present in one area. It was cheaper to build, it was cheaper to manage, it was cheaper to grow. That is why we can see that probably since the beginning and the mid of the 19th century, we see tremendous increase in the number of the cities. And here, despite the country is even like such big and difficult country and India, nevertheless, you see that the urbanization trends are going over and over. And overall in the world, we have increased number of the urban societies. There are different theories and different understandings why we have these urbanization trends. Let me share some of you. So the first idea is the development of technology that I mentioned. So actually, that is definitely connected with the farming and with the irrigation systems that was happening more than 3,000 years before Christ. So that simply means that the people starting to localize themselves, and rather than finding the good area to live, they started create a good area to live. And when they changed their behavior, starting farming and starting building the cities mainly for protection, so they created the atmosphere where development of technology became possible. So the majority of the cases that we see the ancient cities, they were created near some of the rivers or water over the role to help this farming. And there is a number of the good research and books that are concentrated on this idea of the city as a part of the water society or the river society. That means that the majority of the ancient cities were located and built within the access to the drinking water and the access to the water that can help us in farming. Otherwise, we definitely need to find some new places to develop our society. And so this is like, to some extent, the geographical theory of the city development. The other interesting fact is about the functioning of the city that is connected with the idea of monopoly of power or monopoly of resources. And this idea is that when we have the unity of or community that is present in some of the area, that simply means that it was much more easier to produce, it was much more easier to regulate and build some common identity, rather than trying to behave properly with foreigners, with the strangers. And it simply means that city was created and developed as the very functional and very administrative center that helped to do this. So simply the same story as with the development, the idea of the development of the country, when we gave some percentage of our freedoms and of our power to the local authority to regulate our life. And gathering this number of resources, gathering this number of the exact number of some powers, it was much easier to distribute them and distribute them equally. So that's simply the idea of the monopoly and of the functional development. And here I just want to refer to the very beautiful book of Charles Tilly about the coercion, capital, and European states. And in this book, Charles Tilly, one of the greatest sociologists and historians and anthropologists, so he's showing that actually the main idea of localization of the power in the concrete area, and also the localization of the monopoly of force, and not using force, not using weaponry in the dispute regulations, was actually pushing communities to build the cities. And later on, definitely that played, especially with the number of the not so developed, not civilized societies, it was much more easier to protect yourself when you are within the walls of the city. Later, so this also is a part of the dysfunctional development, that city was foreseen as at the structure, at the social structure that makes some functions. So here we can see that in the majority of the cities, besides the authority, there were also people to protect it. Then we see hospitals, then we see schools, then we see manufacturers, especially in the medieval ages. So we can see that in the one entire city, we see different functions and different structures for people who had to do this. And also the schooling, so it could be produced, this knowledge could be produced and reproduced and taught. And whenever the new function appeared, this simply means that the city could be growing and becoming more and more larger. Well, for example, if we lack some functions, so it was also possible to invite somebody to come to the city. There is why, for example, in the majority of the medieval cities, they naturally were cut from the some people that are really developed in the architecture. So we can see that, for example, in terms of architecture, it was very popular for the administration of the city to bring some foreign architectures and to plan to build the city. For example, here in the Lviv, in the medieval part, the majority of the buildings were, for example, built by the Paul from Rome, Pavlo Rimlyanin, yes, that was a person who came from Italy to develop that function. So, and the last idea is about the community-based development. That simply means that the city becoming an area for community growth. And the functions are not so important, but actually the quality of the community living is becoming more and more important. And that is why we see the idea of the neighborhood within the city, yes, that is located, has some own perspective, but this is like the very modern understanding of the city. And if we come to the city development series, we should definitely state that if we combine everything together, that we can see a city as a development of technology and development of facilities. We can see the city as also the monopoly of power or monopoly of resources. That means that we can create, distribute more opportunities, and especially job opportunities. Functional development simply means more services, yes, that we can provide. And community-based development, that simply means that in the city is much more easier to ensure the social and cultural development of the of the community. And these are the major trends that, for example, brings us to the not ancient but really present and contemporary understanding of the city. And I would like to recommend you like this beautiful book of Politics of Urbanism by Warren Magnusson, who actually showed in his book that all these ideas of development technology, monopoly of power, functional development, and community-based development that we consider to be like different theories in the ancient times that pushed the development of city, actually they didn't change. So nowadays, every city is also doing that function. So this theories could be really applicable to any present city. Moreover, then different, they are interconnected. And here, I just want to stress that despite the approach that you are taking as the main approach, we can scientifically divide like these approaches and understanding of the urban development as the two processes. So the first process is that the city grows to gather more natural resources. And this is like the geographical spread idea. So city growth is natural process, yes. And if we see more, for example, opportunities, more resources like outside of the cities, it means that the city to some extent will grab them and make them to be a part of the city, of the community. And here, a good example is that it's quite true for the majority of the cities, especially before the modern times, before the contemporary times, that the city was growing for that. However, the idea of the resource for the growing of the city nowadays is something different than it was. And here we are coming to the politics of the city development. So what should we do? Like if we want to increase our city to make it more powerful, the modern concept and the modern idea is that we are not growing like in the size. The majority of the contemporary cities, actually in Europe, also in Asia and in America, are not working in the way that they are making their growth to gather more resources. They actually redistribute it. And here I just want to show some example here on the chart, on the photo. You can see Hamburg city, and you can see the Hafenstadt, so-called Hafenstadt, that was the center of the Hamburg. And all these buildings, beautiful buildings, were actually docks. But now they're not serving as a docks because we don't see the big shipbuilding and actually the sea people and the sea industry was transformed a little bit to being more global than local, than just gathering the fish in these areas. So, and they were not destroyed, actually, they were reorganized, they were revitalized. And now all these buildings, they are different hubs, office centers, and people can easily work them, take them as a rent, and or live, for example, there. So because Hamburg itself is rather big, so that there is a special regulation that they want to limit the growth of the city and redistribute existing resources inside of their city. And the biggest resource within the city is definitely the land. So the city is owning the land, the city can make money on the land, and that is why this process of natural growth is nowadays being limited within the majority of the countries. Moreover, for example, in that Germany or in Switzerland, they have the special regulations, both on the federal level and on the local level. What is the number of the territory that you can build per year? And in, for example, you exceed the number in the small city, that means that the government has the power to stop you actually to stop any planning of the new buildings and to stop development until statistically you can come to the exact numbers. So that simply means that more and more regulations are paid to stop this natural process of growing that was real natural, really normal for the majority of the time, but not in our days. And the other concept is how we can regulate the growing and the development of the cities right now is that the city grows when we see some coalition of interest. So this approach is showing that we are not so interested in the resources, but we distribute the size. We are making our city bigger because we have interactions between different parts of the city. We have different parts of the interest groups that is really connected with the business development, and we can see that the idea of communication and idea of social interaction is in the center of the city development, not just resources, but social communication. And the beautiful example for showing how this approach is working is actually Chicago. So here in the chart, you can see the Lake Michigan, and you can see the Chicago coast, and you can see this black line. This is the Dan Ryan Expressway, and the interesting fact is that it was built like in the middle of the 20th century, and like because the city was growing too much, and the interesting fact that it was built exactly on the land where the Irish population was living. So city had to persuade a number of people that they should build it, and that was a very big dispute between the entire Irish population that they will be separated on the two parts, because here was actually the Irish community built. But the important issue was that the Irish population became more and more powerful within the city. And just because they were localized, all the others communities, neighborhoods with, for example, German Americans or the like Dutch Americans or Italian Americans were actually located not so close to each other. So the city authorities, when this road was built, actually was corrupted, let's say, by the Italian population, and it was Dan Ryan, who was an architecture, and decided to build this lane and exactly on the lands of the Irish population, so to separate them. And when it happened, Irish population had to resettle themselves, and they, to a major extent, they lose their power and influence in the city. So, and this is very tricky issue that within the urbanism, within the urbanization politics, you can also change, let's say, the social and political atmosphere inside of the city. Now, definitely we see that we don't have like these community locations, at least in the central part of the city anymore. But in Chicago, for example, outside of the center, they are. So we can definitely identify like the Irish community or Ukrainian village, as you know, where the Ukrainians are located. So it turns out in that sense that as a part of the social interactions, urbanization and urban building can also be an architecturing the development of the city could be one of the interesting points of how you can influence the social and political life. And indeed, a number of cities and big cities have their strategy of this replanning. So it's called like the growth machine theory, that despite like the natural process of growing or social process of growing, the main idea is that it can be planned. And big cities usually, and powerful cities, they have more than 100-year plan of how to rebuild the city, of how to restructure the city, because the main idea and of the natural growth is not working anymore. And definitely this is influencing the neighborhood living. Definitely this is influencing the functional style of the city, but that simply means that we are changing as a society, so we are not the same as the Middle Ages, and for living comfortably we need like the new approach to that. So, and what actually are the main trends of how we can change the city if we are changing that, because we have new needs. There are different models of that, and I just want to present you like the three models of how the cities are arranged and how they are changed. So here you can see the concentric zone model. The majority of the medieval cities were built in that phase, and they simply stayed are the same right now. So you can see that the main administrative and center districts are located inside of the city. Let's say in Ukraine, it's in Lviv, it's Ratusha and the Rynok Square. And then we have, for example, the residentials for the high-class residentials and low-class residentials. Yes, we have new business districts. For example, in Lviv, like in the area of the Naukova Square, or for example, in the Knyghini Olgy Square, roads. So the new business districts that are created. And then we also can see that heavy manufacturing that is located outside probably of the city. And this is a typical structure, as I said, for the majority of the ancient cities, and still a number of cities like Warsaw, like Philadelphia, for example, Lviv, the same story, Kiev, the same story. They are using this model. However, we also see that there is an idea of the sectoral model, when in the center is located the business district, yes, but then we don't have these radial cycles of city growing. This means all communities are located here in the cycle. So here, no, we have the separate districts or separate sectors that are incorporated and going closer to the administrative and business center and political center. So here you can see that there could be several sectors of the low-class residentials, while it could also be the sectors of the manufacturer, and there are also, for example, the high-class residentials are living in the separate sector. And to the major extent, we see such a situation in Chicago, in Calgary, or for example, in Paris. Yes, and they are not living in the radial; they're living in these sectors. But the most, let's say, I would not say prominent, but the most well recognized and to the idea of the modern urbanism and new urbanism, the most developed and used scheme, especially for building new cities or transforming the old cities to the new styles, is actually the multiple nuclei model. That simply means that we recognized different communities that themselves are should be self-sufficient, and that you don't need to go somewhere to the other part of the city because your job or, for example, your facilities are located there. Because here in the two past models, both in the sectoral model or, for example, in the concentric zone model, we have one of the major problem. That means migration. Because you can see that hospitals could be located in some area, then your job could be located in some other area, and your living, your community, your neighborhood can be located in the third area. And that simply means that you can go through different parts of the city even to reach that area. And this is not the problem for the small cities, but indeed this is one of the fundamental problems for the big cities, because you're spending your time, you're using, for example, if you're not using the city infrastructure, using your car, that means that we have more cars, and that means that we have really problems with the parking zones that actually we faced in the majority of Ukrainian cities. And multiple nuclei model, that simply means that within the one area, you can organize or co-organize everything that you need. So this simply means that within the one neighborhood or sector, you have both and places to work, you have parks, you have architecture, different centers, you have leisure zones, you have hospitals, you have universities, you have schools, so everything that you need, and you don't need to go to the other side of the city just simply to reach it. And the splendid examples for that is Berlin, or for example, Shanghai or London. London was rebuilt. So London was one of the example of the circular model, but then it was transformed that, for example, you have several areas for living and for business, but then you have a park. New York was also tried to build in that way, that you have living areas, working areas, and then you have a park. So that simply means that you don't need to travel to the other parts of the city. Here is also an interesting point of are we living in the city still, or are we living in the neighborhoods or in the streets? So this is interesting point that should be answered. Nevertheless, in terms of the regulations inside of the city, it's much more easier, it's much more cheaper, and it's much more ecological friendly, you not to travel to the other part, spending your time and creating like traffic jams rather than going to the hospital or the building to what you need. Here, this is a very interesting case for Ukraine, because the majority of the present cities, especially the old cities, yes, they were built with a Soviet approach. And the Soviet approach was actually locating different sectors in different parts of the city. So they were not taken to account like this urban migration inside of the city, and that is why nowadays we see so many challenges in terms of the functioning on the city in the new model and in the new lifestyle. Nevertheless, despite the model that you are using, we can see that the proportion of the urban population is growing, is much growing, and it's happening everywhere. So you can see that here in the chart that it's happening both in more developed regions. So more developed regions are being fastly urbanized, but the same story is with less developed regions. So less developed regions are not agricultural or village regions, they're also urbanized, and you can see that the trend, the percentage of growth is even much more higher than for the developed societies. So what is the cause of urbanization? Let us see. The first reason that we see the urbanization growing is actually natural increase of population. Yeah, we are becoming more and more present as a populations of civilization in our world, and this actually we can see here in the chart that the number of the new births in the majority of the countries is much more higher than the number of deaths. Not in all areas, because pay attention here on the Eastern and Central and Eastern Europe, also Russia. We can see here that the natural decline of populations of it definitely depends on the year when you are looking, but in general, statistically, we can see that doesn't mean that the number of deaths is much more higher than the number of births, But for example, if we see the migration trends and people are going to the other countries and they are not registered anymore, then we will see statistically this situation that the number of deaths will exceed the number of people. However, here you can also witness the situation in Asia and in Africa, especially, that the number of new people, the number of births is much more higher than the number of deaths. So that simply means that in the few years they will have the large part of the population that that need to live somewhere, and even if they are located within the villages, that simply means that we'll have more and more people there, and probably it will be transformed into the city living. So the natural increase in population is the first and very natural reason for urbanization, for city growing, because simply we have more people. Then we also have the migration process, and thinking about migration process, we usually think about going from one city from other. However, the major trends in migration is actually from the rural areas to urban areas. And here we can see the presentees of the push and pull factors that are causing that, and definitely these are employment opportunities, living conditions and services are much more better in the cities than in the rural areas. Access to education, access to water, access to hospitals, urban lifestyle that is not so hard like as in urban areas, and also the question of aging. So it's much more easier to be older living in the urban areas because you have access to, let's say, to the medical structure. So these are the major push and pull factors for people to going from from rural to urban areas. And what is interesting here that even despite the coronavirus, during the coronavirus crisis, during this quarantine, we saw the number of the cases when people were moving, so downshifting. They were moving from the urban areas to rural areas because it was much more quieter there, not so many people, so the risks of getting COVID were decreasing. However, that was not the overall trend. Yes, once more because of the access to the benefits, and especially to the hospitals that in urban areas are much more widespread than in the rural areas. Nevertheless, here in the chart, you can see the percentage of the total flows. And while mostly in developed cities, you can see that migration is happening in the urban areas, so from city to one city, because the lifestyle and the standards are already good. Nevertheless, you still see some trends in rural urban areas, yes. But for example, in the developing countries, in the development societies, you can see that there is a big trend of rural to urban. So the urbanization process is happening highly. While, for example, in the cases of the, let's say, Cambodia and India, or for example, Timor, yes, we can see that rural to rural flows are also present and they're really powerful. But here it is a question of the number of the cities, of the big cities that exist. So in terms of they will have more cities, so we will definitely see this trend of rural to urban. Why? Because it's actually happening in the other countries. But nevertheless, you also see the percentage of going from urban to rural is also popular among all the structure of the migration. So all trends are at the place, and there is interesting question also how we can manage them, because we can definitely see that there are, besides some benefits, but also some negative factors of the rapid urbanization. So what are they? What are the main impacts, both positive and negative, of the urbanization? The positive impacts of urbanization are mainly concerned with the economic development. Definitely, if you gather economic and human resources in one place, it will be much more cheaper and much more efficient to create any innovations and developments, so-called the cumulative effect. And you definitely know Dubai case. Yes, there is two beautiful photos on 91 and 2016, and that's wow, that's fantastic how the city investing and the country investing clearly. When you concentrate economic resources, people resources, what you can do, let's say in the 30 years, then or actually 20 years, then definitely the pro factor is development in social, cultural, and educational spheres, because you need people, you need universities, you need some leisure institutions for leisure, let's say clubs or restaurants, so people can spend their time. So, and it's boosting all the economy and society to be placed. And it's also boosting culture, because the urban culture is created and it's very natural. Yes, so the more clever people and culturally oriented people, innovative people you gather, the more boost you will have. That doesn't mean that in rural areas you don't have like entrepreneurials, you don't have like the art people. Yes, you have them, but this is not concentrated within the one area. You see, if you concentrate all of them, that simply means that you will have a very boosting process of creating something new. Then healthcare and children's survival rate is much more higher. And indeed, with the urbanization, we can see that in terms of health, we are running much better. Then the density of population makes cheaper to provide goods and services. And that's quite true. Let's imagine that you are doing the water, for example, and for the concrete area rather than for the number of the cities, or providing like the gas or electricity. So it's much more cheaper. Then the larger amount of wealth could be gathered and distributed. And this is very statistically fair, because once more people you have, that simply means that even with the low taxes, you can gather more. And there are also environmental advantages if you do smart resource management. So usually we are considering that there are a lot of environmental disadvantages, and that's fair, that's true. However, once more, if we are locating people in one area, if we do very efficient management of how we, for example, gather resources, distribute resources, or even this fact with the transportation, if you do the infrastructure management greatly, so we don't need for people to go too much by car to somewhere. That simply means that you will have the some of the environmental advantages within that area. But definitely there are negative impacts of urbanization, especially uncontrolled urbanization. The first is that the more the powerful city became, the more people are interested to come there. And the more comfortable city became, the more people are interested to come. And without the proper regulation, there is a risk of creating so-called slums. Yes, slums are the areas with the overpopulation in poor and insecure regions. And so people, they want some job, but they can't offer to pay a lot in the city for a rent, for example, or to buy some houses. So they're going to the areas where which they can afford. And the slum problem is one of the most important problems in the growing cities. And we can see it, for example, here in the chart. If I'm not mistaken, so this is a map of Lima, but I could be mistaken here. And you can see these red areas, these are slums. Or ghetto, yes, when people, and you can see that it's creating over the city, and this is very negative effect, because definitely we can see that it shows a lot of social tensions. Then the problem is with the number of the population that could be rapidly growing within such slums. Then the problem of the land owning and property, in the inequality, then supplies, and so on and so forth. Especially if you're planning to build like the hospital that should serve the several amount of people, but then you get too many people in one of the slum and hospital can't work properly. But the number of people is increasing. So you have a number of the real social infrastructural problems within the slums. Inequality. Inequality is more visible and has more leverage on physical and social environment, especially within the slums, and you can see it. Then sanitation, water supply. Yes, because usually you plan how many people even you can provide with water. When you have the overpopulation within the concrete areas, this simply could be a problem. Waste and pollution, then air quality with the overpopulation, health risks once more are increasing, food demand is increasing and changing the face of the city, because once more you need markets, supermarkets, shops that should be present there, and they're also located, take into account the number of the people and the increase in the crime level, because definitely we see, unfortunately, that not all the people are behaving properly, especially when they can't afford the good life and they see that the good life is around. So these are negative impacts of urbanization, especially if it's not planned. So there is a big question how to grow, how to become more economically developed, have to be more comfortable for the citizens and not cause this problem of ghettoization, of making ghettos, because people will come. Definitely, it's impossible to build a successful city without bringing people from the other areas. So in any sense, we know this migration trends from the with the push and pull factor. So rich cities are very powerful pull factor. So we can't avoid it. And here, I just want to bring this once more, this beautiful modeling by the European Union. So you can see that here in the city, in the Milano, different areas, new neighborhoods are located with a migrants concentration or refugees concentration, and this is what we are talking about, like this problem of slums, this problem of ghettos. So in the majority of the cities, for example, for Frankfurt, they have a special strategy that was concentrated in the fact that you should not put migrants only into one area, into the one neighborhood, because it will negatively play on the role of the city. Yes, it's much more easier for them to assimilate within the one area. It's much more easier for them because it's your culture, it's your neighborhood, so people you can talk and help each other. And this is a very natural trend. Remember this from the migration classes, that the people are going to the areas they already know that it was done there. However, there was a tactics of the city like to do assimilation. So to locate them within the different areas, not to create ghettos, not to create slums. While, for example, in the majority cases of the American urbanism, and by this I mean North America, both United States and Canada, for example, the neighborhood development is very natural. So this is a logic of building the cities, and they face a number of troubles recently because of the concentration of people within the one ethnical points. The same, for example, problem was the number of the cities in Sweden met during the Syrian crisis. Actually, after the Syrian crisis, when we had a number of refugees, they were located like in the Uppsala or Stockholm in one areas. And that was really tricky because sooner, just in 2 years, I think that these communities came and asked, for example, to build like the new hospitals for them, to build a monk for for Muslim population, and also to introduce the Muslim, for example, holidays as official holidays in the city. So it could be challengeable. It could be challengeable. I'm not judging it's good or bad, but it could be challengeable. So a number of the modern cities, they have the special tactics not to locate like the people in one area, just to avoid ghettos and just to avoid slums. But this is very difficult, and this is very costly, because you can understand what it means, like to provide this housing, like people who can't afford this housing. And this brings us to the question of does urbanization actually helps to become richer, especially the smart urbanization? And we can't answer it directly. And however, we can observe the correlation. We have this relation that these territories or these countries that are highly urbanized also has larger percentage of GDP per capita. So you can see right here in the top right up that the majority of the rich countries are on the top right, while the majority of the countries with a low income or middle low income are on the bottom left. While there is not the so it is a dependency. Actually, sorry, there is a correlation, but it's not dependency. So it doesn't mean if you start the urbanization, fast urbanization in your country, that the people become richer. Nevertheless, there is a correlation between them, and we can see the change. What is also important, I just stress here on the few countries. So there is a separate situation with Singapore. It has also been a city, and yeah, and the city itself, you can see the tremendous change in terms of the GDP per capita that has happened here. But nevertheless, even Ethiopia, yeah, or in India, being urbanized, they also have the growth of GDP per capita. And in the world in general, so world is urbanized from 60s, and to also see the growth in general of the GDP per capita. But also, for example, we see Ukraine. Yes, and it's not about, so we can see that the trend, urbanization trend was growing since 70s, yes, but the GDP per capita was not growing, and this is the question of the other question of the distribution of wealth and actually the accumulation of wealth. So there is no direct dependency between the urbanization and the growing of the wealth of the people. So what are the main urbanization trends? Today, actually, this is creation of the suburban areas and agglomerations. So you can see starting, for example, in the 1980s, in the United States, especially, but also in all North America, you can see so-called the suburban sprawl. And here in the picture, you can see how the lines, these are actually the photo of the lines in night, between Boston, New York, Philadelphia, so this coastal area. And to some extent, this is really negative, because you are connecting the cities, and people used to live, to build new buildings and to new cities within this car line. Have to go into New York or Philadelphia where you have a work, but this is really car dependent structure. And but nevertheless, you can see how the city is becoming more and more connected with other cities. So in the future, probably this will be one city spot that is created out of the different cities. While, for example, in Europe, with the new urbanism approach starting in 90s, the big issue is to keep the city borders. And here, I just want to show you, this is a map of Germany, of the federal lands. And actually, you can see this is the number of the percentage growth of people inside the cities. So despite the situation in North America, you can see that the majority uh, of the growing percentage of population is happening within the very concrete territories, like here the Berlin area, yeah. So here like the Essen, Dortmund, and Düsseldorf area, so Hamburg area, and so on and so forth. Here Munich. That simply means that the cities are growing in the number of population, but they're not growing within the size. And here the idea of revitalization of the land, of the buildings, of the property is really happening in Germany. However, what is also interesting that with this approach of having access to the infrastructure in every part of the city and good infrastructure, there is not need in the majority of the big of the small cities, people who are living in small cities to go somewhere to get a job in the big cities. So for example, in Switzerland, in Germany, it's quite possible to live in the small village and have access of 3 or 5 possibilities of cars, roads, railways to come to the big city. And a lot of companies are also located within the small cities, like this idea of the decentralization. So you can live and earn money perfectly in the small city or in the small neighborhood. There is no need for you to go to the bigger city. So you can see that actually the percentage of change was not so great. Even the huge areas of Berlin, or for example in the Munich, they were growing not so fast, so it's only up to 2% of growings, and this is quite comfortable to the modern urbanism idea style of how you can develop the city. There is also trend within the growing of the metropolitan area, and we definitely see the growth of this metropolitan area. So here, talking about Philadelphia and Boston and New York and DC and Richmond, so this so-called Boston DC metropolitan area, that is quite localized and quite powerful in the economic terms related to it, but also quite localized into each self. And also we can see that there is a trend that is happening in the old world. So there is different parts of the world, different cities that are nowadays not the only spot, but they are united together within the metropolitan area. So for example, the great Istanbul, that is both Istanbul and all the villages around there, or for example in Rhein-Ruhr in Germany, or the big London, or Moscow, or whatever, São Paulo, and any part of the country you can see. So this is when several cities unite themselves into one area. So here basically you can see the idea. Yes, so when the concretely city property could be limited, then with the good infrastructure the urban agglomeration is created, and then you can see the larger metropolitan area. But in terms of the running of the city, in terms of the politics of the regulation, it gives you much more possibilities to work and to prosper. Why? Because in general, for example, if you are an owner of the coffee shop somewhere in within the city property, and you have, for example, you can count of the, let's say, 15-20 minutes access to you. That simply means that all the neighborhoods that are living around your coffee shop can come to you, spending like not more than like 15 or 20 minutes. And then you probably, for example, in a day you can sell like 500 coffees. But when you have the good access of transport, when you have the good infrastructure, that simply means that if there is a line that is going somewhere from the agglomeration area, and people can spend the same 20 minutes, but not going by themselves, but taking a train or public transportation, that simply means that your number of the visitors can be doubled or even tripled. So it's really smart for the city to think like in terms of the metropolitan area, not only providing all the best within the city property. Otherwise, once more, there is a problem of ghetto could be created. While if you have this network system, that simply means that you are given more and more access wisely and cleverly for the entrepreneurs. But that also trend with the gathering, with the localization, this creation of agglomerations and metropolitans is bringing us to the idea of the mega cities. Here you can see a very interesting chat that they're mainly in the 70s, there were only few cities that were living more than 10 million of people. So in North America, that was definitely New York. Then in Japan, it was Tokyo. And if I'm not mistaken, it was Kyoto. But then with the 2000s, you can see the growing number of the cities, of these areas. We call them mega cities. That means both city itself and then agglomeration and metropolis where people are living. So it's growing. And in 2030, there is a projection that we will see increase in such number of the cities, especially in Africa. That cause the natural birth rate is growing, and that simply means that the people need some place to live, and the natural process that you can have more possibilities within the city is causing that effect that the new cities are growing and growing. So the Lagos or Kinshasa or Cairo or Johannesburg, yes, in South African Republic could be such points. And in general, if you're talking about this cities, mega cities, we are coming to the idea of the global cities or large cities. You can see also by the United Nations is showing that this trend is growing. So we could see that in 90s there were almost 10 mega cities with the population more than 10 million of people, but in 2030 there will be more than 43 such cities. Then the large cities from 5 million to 10 million, it was very slow, very little percentage in 90s with only 21 city, but in 2030 it's projected by the United Nations that it will be 66, and then mid-sized cities. So urbanization trends are growing and growing, and that definitely creates a difficult situation for the authority of the city. That simply means, once more, if you don't think wisely about that, if you don't measure and manage migration, population growth, you will have definitely negative impacts of the very fast urbanization that we were discussing. Yeah, so here you can see a chart with the number of people that are living in the urban agglomerations that are more than 1 million of people. Nevertheless, we can see that take into account in general the number of the country, and you can see that once more for the developed countries, this number is growing. So the people are definitely coming to the urbanized agglomerations, while in the majority of world for 2017, they are still located either in the cities or like in the rural areas. However, we also see some trends of the present use of people in the urban population who are living in the largest city, and this also is quite negative impact, because if everything concentrated, let's say, in the capital of the city, usually it happens in the capital of the city, that simply means the social disproportion. So more opportunities, more possibilities within the capital city, and people are moving there. So the migration trends, these pulling factors are playing dramatically there. And we can see that in the number of the countries, developed countries, so they try to limit it. That is why, for example, they're trying to push the development within the decentralization process to the other cities. And that's quite good for Ukraine. So actually, so we are at the good starting point, unfortunately, not so rich point, but good starting point to distribute, not to locate everything in Kyiv, and to have the possibility for people to rise quietly. Because we're coming to that once more, because of the within the predictions that are still present right now by different organizations. So this is a chart by the UN, World Urbanization Prospect, and the other data. We are not stopping within the urbanization. So the urbanization trends are growing and growing, and later you can see, even if at the beginning of the class we see that South East Asia and Central Africa and East Africa, the percentage of people who were not living in the urban areas was much more lower. Nevertheless, there is a very clear prediction that it will grow even there. It will grow, not fast, but it will grow even there. And the majority of our world will be living in the city. So almost with 1000%, like if you take the New Zealand or Australia, or for example, some of the European states. So we will be, if we do not want to stop this, in a few years, we will be really urbanized civilization. And that brings us to the question of the global cities, of the powerful and global cities. That doesn't mean that they are big city with a million of the population, but in the many cases they are. So what is a global city itself? The idea of the global city was presented by the Saskia Sassen, anthropologist and very powerful thinker in terms of the global cities, Scandinavian thinker, who is right now working with the US institution. So she pointed out that in 1991 that the global city is a city with a significant production of financial resources, of services, of goods that has the tremendous impact on the global economy. So this is a city that contributes to the global economy. And there is a special Kearney and Chicago Council on the Global Affairs that created like the 5 main factors that that we can take into account when thinking about the city as a global city. That means that we should play an impact on the global scale within the business activity. So more resources, more companies, more production, then human capital, informational exchange, then the cultural some factors. So we should bring something to the global society, and also the political engagement. And take into account also these factors, McKinsey Consulting Company make their predictions a few years ago that by 2030, there'll be 600 cities in the world that will run 60% of the world economy. And they will be to some extent named the global cities. They were really rich. And take into account the urbanization trends, take into account the regulation and the decentralization in the many of the countries, it is a very big question whether Ukrainian, let's say, cities will be amount of these 600. And what should we do to bring our cities there? And should we bring our cities there? But in general, we see that trend. And we see right now, sorry for Ukrainian, that many of the cities are becoming more and more powerful. Many of the cities, even economically, are doing better than the GDP of the separate countries. So pay attention on the New York. This is an old chart for 2016, but nevertheless, you can see that New York itself was doing, like all the businesses there, more than the economy of Canada overall. The same story, for example, London and Netherlands, or for example, Moscow and United Arab Emirates. And you can see here how many was doing Ukraine in 2016, so 90 billions of dollars. So very small amount of money. So Osaka was doing better, or Paris was doing much better. Well, the city of Kyiv was doing only 17 billions of dollar, and I can tell you how many was doing Lviv. So it was doing like 15 times lesser than Kyiv itself. So there is a big question. So should this concept of the city development and being the global city should be a concept of the idea of the country? Because to some extent it will ruin the idea of the country state, but on the other point, you can see that, yeah, urbanization trends are not stopping. So, and we are growing in that way. And there are a number of different metrics and data how you can understand and how you can come to the idea of the global city. So I personally will advise you, if you're interested in this topic, to go to the Global Power City Index that was presented by the Japanese think tank. So they bring like the 6 different factors of economy, research and development, culture, livability, so the quality of life, then environment and accessibility at the main points for thinking about the global city. So the cities can compete, and that doesn't mean that you should be best in every area. So we can see, for example, London, that really great in terms of culture interaction, but for the environment in only 22nd inside of the cities. Or for example, New York, the same story. Or for example, Sydney, that is much more better in terms of all the cities, global cities in the world, in terms of the ecology and there is a very clear and data and metrics that you can take to account thinking about the development of the city. And what is good thinking in the terms of data and metrics here, because this simply means that you can plan. Yeah, you can plan, you can compete, and usually those cities that were included into that lists, here it is dependency that the big companies and the powerful production and services are simply looking for such areas that are booming, that are growing. So a big question here, should we have the strategy of the city development as one of our natural idea, and should we compete with the other cities in the world thinking about urbanization that is really growing? What we can do as a follow-up, so we can see that the urbanization is a very logical process, it's a very natural process of the social development, and it's definitely is based on bringing benefits to the communities that are living in. In general, 55% of the world population is living in the cities today, so we are highly urbanized civilization, and there is a prediction by the UN at least that by 2050 more than 70% will live in the cities. And do you guess how many percentage of urbanization is in Ukraine? So let's see it. So it will be your task, and then we'll discuss in the class. Urbanization occurs because natural growth, yes, and because of the migration. And the main push and pull factors of the rural to urban migration is definitely employment opportunities, living conditions and standards, more services, better education, and overall the likelihood of the urban lifestyle. We have both positive and negative impacts of urbanization. For the positive, it's localization of costs and resources, cheaper goods, services per capita. Yes, you don't need to spend too much. Then wealth collection and etc. Well, there are negative impacts, and these are inequality, slums or ghettos, the problem of waste, problem of pollution if it's uncontrolled, health risks, crime, and so on and so forth. And we definitely understand that we are urbanizing, like within the suburban areas, within the agglomerations. Then we come to the metropolis. We can observe the presences of the mega cities, and definitely we can see that right now we have the powerful global cities who are running world culture, economy, and social life. So this is a question: what we should do? Do we have a strategy to be there? And finally, I just want to bring some questions to think about, and that probably we'll discuss during the class. So are there any benefits of being a global city comparing to the possible risks? Because there is not the clear answer, yes and no. We see both positive and negative trends. Well, there is a not dependency, but what is the correlation between public wealth and urbanization? Can urbanization actually help to developed countries, to modernize countries? Should it be one of the main idea for the countries with the low and low middle income to urbanize themselves? Can we see this dependency? Correlation, yes, we can see, but is there some dependency? And that the growth of the global cities means that actually we should change our thinking about politics and our understanding ourselves as a nations, as the state nations. Should we change our political model from state oriented to city oriented? Should we go to more policies, ancient policies, as we have seen them in Greece, in Rome, or for example in Italy? The best way of how we should run our future society and future communities. So I will stop here right now with these questions. Let us discuss and let us see more of the process of urbanization and the influence of our world civilization. So see you in the class.